Mr. Speaker, I rise today to say that I was saddened to have to oppose the tax bill that the House of Representatives passed last evening. I could not, in good conscience, vote for a deal that so lopsidedly benefits big corporations while failing to ensure a substantial tax cut to middle and working class families. I believe this deal is deeply inequitable, and at a time when we have seen the greatest rise in inequality, when big corporations made super profits at the expense of the consumer. It is a mockery of who representative government works for. This bill delivers massive tax cuts for the biggest corporations while denying middle-class families the economic security they had under the expanded monthly child tax credit that was passed in 2021. Let me be unequivocal. This is a reversal of the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the United States. This bill provides billions of dollars in tax relief for the wealthy and pennies for the poor. This expanded and improved child tax credit, which we passed in 2021, it returns $8 for every dollar spent. How? Because the child tax credit helps children learn more, earn more, and grow up healthier. Which is why I find it upsetting and appalling that we would condition a limited extension of this life-altering program with a vast giveaway to billionaires and corporations who are already well-practiced in paying no taxes. Dish Network, FedEx, Salesforce, T-Mobile, and dozens of others. And I'll later give you the list of the others. These corporations, dozens of others, pay no federal income tax from 2018 to 2020 under the Trump tax law. At a time when big corporations are richer than ever, the idea that we must evenly split the pot with working and middle-class families is absurd. But there is no even split in this bill. It's $5 for the corporations and $1 to our children. Understand, people are calling this an expansion of the child tax credit. It is no expansion of the child tax credit. It is a step backward, and that needs to be understood. When groceries and other costs like the child care have skyrocketed, driving record corporate profits of $3 trillion in 2023, it was families bearing the brunt of inflation and high interest rates. The expanded monthly child tax credit is an antidote to child poverty. It is an antidote to inflation. It is a successful tool that lifted millions and millions of children out of poverty virtually overnight. Half of children in the United States were lifted out of poverty. 4 million. Today, families live paycheck to paycheck. Their wages have not kept up with rising costs. The economy is not working for them. And to our great shame, it is children who will suffer the most. This bill fails to sufficiently improve the child tax credit. It leaves millions of middle-class families without a tax cut like they received in 2021. It keeps millions of children in preventable poverty because of a policy choice. This bill strips working-class families of the true economic security that was achieved with the expanded monthly child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan. I understand that no bill that can become law, especially in a divided government like we have today, is going to be perfect or have everything that we want. I'm grateful for the hard work of Representatives Neal and Pelosi, Senators Bennett, Brown, Booker, and Wyden on the bill, and for the members who spoke out, who offered amendments to improve it. Representatives Del Bene, Sanchez, Moore. Congresswoman Moore is here today and will speak in short order. Representative Sewell and Representative Doggett. An extension of the expanded monthly child tax credit is what our constituents need and deserve. It worked better than any other federal program that we have seen. As I said, it lifted half of our children out of poverty, lowered the hunger rate in the United States by 26%. We lowered the child poverty rate, and today the rate has gone from 5.2% to 12.4%. And yes, working families, middle-class families, vulnerable families have seen their wages decline as a result of pulling the rug out from under them with the expiration of the child tax credit. It is the one best thing we can do to improve economic well-being and security of the most vulnerable American families and to bring back the largest middle-class tax cut in history. This was a lost opportunity. A lost opportunity. It leads the way to, in 2025, making the Trump tax credits, which benefited the richest 0.1% of the people in this country, the biggest corporations in this country. It leads the way to moving in that direction. It can't go there. We have to stop that, and we have to make sure that we will. I will look forward to continue that fight, to have an expanded and an improved child tax credit that we delivered for all families in 2021. And with that, what I want to do is to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, my colleague, Representative Scott, who is and will become the chair of the Education and Labor Committee come 2025. Congressman Scott is recognized. 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I want to thank her for her long-time commitment to the child tax credit. We know it works, and she's been the most dedicated advocate for the child tax credit that we have in the United States Congress today. Thank you, Rosa DeLauro. When congressional Democrats and President Biden enacted the American Rescue Plan in 2021 without a single Republican vote, we prioritized the economic well-being of working families with the expanded monthly child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan reached 61 million children and reduced child poverty by nearly half, lifting nearly 3 or 4 million children out of poverty. In contrast, this bill is expected to lift only 500,000 children out of poverty when it is fully phased in. So this is not an extension of the child tax credit that we passed in the American Rescue Plan. It is not as generous. It does not help the lowest income families. And unlike the ARP plan, there are no monthly checks. People do not pay their bills once a year. They pay them monthly. So the impact of this program will not nearly be as strong as the former child tax credit that we passed in the American Rescue Plan. And so this deal fails to reinstate the economic gains made for working families and fails to come anywhere close to the reduction in child poverty achieved under the American Rescue Plan. And while providing only $33 billion in benefits for children, this bill prioritizes $185 billion in tax cuts for corporations that were included in the 2017 Trump tax scam. It is overwhelmingly lopsided in favor of big corporations that are already paying historically low tax rates as a result of the Trump tax scam. And what's even more egregious is the bill makes the tax breaks for corporations and businesses retroactive and immediate, while not doing the same for working families. This doesn't make sense from either a budgetary or a public policy perspective, and is a bold display of misplaced priorities. It is notable that congressional Republicans sanctimoniously complain about the national debt and budget deficits. Earlier this month, Republicans on the House Budget Committee even passed the so-called Fiscal Commission Act because they were seemingly so concerned about the national debt and claimed to want to do something about it. and yet they consistently abandon all sense of fiscal responsibility when it comes to enacting corporate tax cuts. In fact, before the bill has even come to the floor, we just passed the tax cut last night costing about $200 billion. That, when fully phased in over 10 years, will cost about $700 billion over the 10-year period. And so, Mr. Speaker, ultimately I voted no because this fiscally irresponsible tax deal is too lopsided in favor of corporations and special interests while failing to provide equivalent support for working families. Again, I thank Rosa DeLauro for her advocacy for the child tax credit and for families, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Virginia, and someone who has been an indefatigable champion for education and for working people in this country, and always at the forefront of what makes sense in terms of providing for the economic security of people in this country, and particularly in children, in his work. And he just hit the nail on the head that this is a question of just such gross inequity that is going to be foisted on our families and our children. And the people who are standing up and talking about the expansion are just fooling themselves about what this bill is about. They need to take a look at who the beneficiaries are. And I just say a thank you to Congressman Scott for his work now and what he's done in the past and what he will continue to do in the future in this body. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, let me yield to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who sits on the Ways and Means Committee, and in that committee stood, and she'll talk about her amendment, which was defeated on a party line vote, but someone who's never afraid to stand up and to speak out, and she did so last night on this floor in opposition to this lopsided tax deal. Congresswoman Moore is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for putting together this special order, Representative DeLauro. Mr. Speaker, I felt really compelled to come to the floor because 1 minute last night during the tax debate did not seem to be inadequate to explain why I adamantly opposed the tax bill in its current iteration. Mr. Speaker, Ms. DeLauro, what I have been told is that a half loaf is just better than no loaf at all. That this tax bill was a compromise, and that somehow, as a legislative body and as a legislator, we ought to be used to compromising. But I just didn't want to capitulate. I didn't mind compromising, but I didn't want to capitulate. And it wasn't just that we passed this tax bill that supposedly was an improvement for the child tax credit, but we passed $600 billion of tax breaks for businesses, which is the job of the Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what members of this body have against poor children. And why are we in some sort of Dickensian reality here? Charles Dickens, where 5-year-olds have to go to work to take care of themselves? So part of what is flawed about this so-called improvement in the child tax credit is that it relegates children's well-being and their ability to get a supplemental income based on their parents' income. So if you're married and you're a stay-home mom and you make your husband makes $399,000 a year, I'm happy that we provide you the full credit, because even at that income level, we ought to recognize the tremendous expense that it is to raise children, and we ought to consider the benefits of providing shelter and good food and good nutrition for children. But why is it that those children in that home are more deserving of a supplement than a child who lives in a household where a parent makes less than $22,000 a year? Why? Why is it that this body perceives that the lowest income children living in those households, that their parents need to put in a greater work effort? Well, I asked the Joint Committee on Taxation to do a little arithmetic for me so that I could sort of understand the thinking behind what my colleagues were saying. They said people need to work. Children need to see their parents going to work before they just get this welfare money and this free money. Well, under current law, if single mom gets out there and gets herself a minimum wage job, doing her part, she's only required under our welfare policy to work 20 hours a week. But if she gets out there and finds herself 2 minimum wage jobs, paying $7.25 an hour, and she goes and does Uber or Instacart after she finishes her 2 part-time jobs, then and only then will she be eligible for the tax credit. And I don't know who takes care of her kids while she's working more than 40 hours per week in order to qualify for the child tax credit. I mean, that's just criminal. And as my colleagues have pointed out, in this same tax package, we have corporations that are getting stuff like research expensing, and I think R&D is a legitimate tax break. But some of it, there's research expensing that could hardly be called research. We also provide billions of dollars for bonus depreciation, which is really quite wasteful in our economy for companies to be able to buy new equipment year after year after year, because they can expense it, write it off. And while they're able to write off their business expenses, we're writing off millions of children whose parents don't have tax liability. So companies can have no tax liability, pay no taxes, and get $600 billion, and parents who have no tax liability get nothing. Now, I'm going to yield back to you in a moment, Ms. DeLauro, but I would like you to yield to a question before I do. As a refundable tax credit, there are about 61 million children who are able to benefit from this provision. And yet, I see through all of the talking points and literature and analyses of this proposal, that we're just supposed to be happy with this half loaf because now 16 million kids and 400,000 more are going to benefit from this proposal. Is this correct?
Let me just mention, and first of all, let me say thank you. And the point that you have made and that Congressman Scott made, these tax breaks for the richest corporations, they're immediate. They are immediate. The child tax credit, this has to be phased in over a 3-year period of time. And it is a lower number than they had with the original expanded monthly child tax credit, which was $3,000 for kids between 6 and 17, $3,600 for kids who are under 6. So it is a lower credit, and then they phase it in terms of refundability. And the most vulnerable kids are excluded altogether. And it is astounding that the inequity of all of that. Now, what we did with the child tax credit, which was in the American Rescue Plan, the monthly credit reached 61 million children.
61 million.
61 million children. And and there was about 4 million kids lifted out of poverty, almost half the kids in the U.S. lifted out of poverty. Now, what we're talking about in this tax deal is 400,000 kids. They talk about being lifted out of poverty versus 4 million. And the 16 million that's made reference to is some piece of it at some portion in some time during this phase-in, et cetera, will be the beneficiary of a much lower tax credit. And in addition to that, what people are saying is that we've expanded the child tax credit. Folks out there are going to believe that they're going to be getting what they got in 2021. And it's misinformation. It is just about trying to put a veneer on what's been done here and giving the biggest corporations, and as Congressman Scott pointed out, in this three-year period, $185 billion versus $33 billion for the child tax credit. Don't tell me, give me the facts. And that's what we try to do. Mm-hmm. That's what we have tried to do in the last week since this proposal came out, is give people the information, the accurate information about what is here. And they're hiding it, and they're hiding it. And you know what? As I said, unbelievable missed opportunity. I was told, I have to say this, I was told when we first went forward on the child tax credit, I wanted it to be permanent. They said, we can't do it, we can't afford permanence. I said, 5 years. Can't do it, can't afford it. 5 years. 3 years. Can't afford it. 1 year. And then they asked me, would you support 1 year of expanded monthly child tax credit? And I said, yes. And as I mentioned earlier, the most successful federal program that we have seen coming down the pike that met its mission in lifting kids out of poverty and providing families with economic security, helping them to deal with the cost of living effort. I was also told at that time, Rosa, we do it for a year, it's not going to go away. Yeah. It's not going to go away. It went away. And the first opportunity that we had to restore the child tax credit, we failed.
We pushed more kids into poverty.
That's right. The kids have gone back into poverty. And it's preventable, as you pointed out. This is preventable poverty. We know the answer, and we have refused to take that answer and move forward on it. That's what happened here last night.
Can I ask you another question? Will the gentlelady continue to yield? As you mentioned, I had a proposal, a compromise.
Your amendment, go for it.
A compromise, not what I wanted. I wanted a fully refundable tax credit. But I was looking at our current work requirements for this tax credit. And I said to myself, even though a work requirement really defies the whole purpose of a child supplement, if we were to compromise and have a work requirement, why would someone who, through no fault of their own, finds themselves working for $7.25 an hour, they're subject to rules under our welfare reform protocols, under our TANF legislation, to work 20 hours a week when they have young children. If And I had the Joint Committee on Taxation do an analysis. And if a woman with 2 kids worked 20 hours a week, did everything that was expected of her, she still would not qualify for this tax credit. And if she wanted to get a fully refundable tax credit, she'd have to neglect her children in order to do it. She'd have to work more than 40 hours, Mr. Scott, in order to qualify. You know, that's slavery, y'all. I mean, are we going to revisit? Why are we continuing to cling to these old models of financing our economy and deciding that women who by definition, are typically single parents struggling to raise their kids must work more than 40 hours in order to receive a benefit from their government? Why is that? Why? What do they have against these poor children? And I would ask you to yield to that question.
Well, you ask a very relevant question, and we have seen Congressman Kassar, Congressman Scott, yourself, we've seen on this floor the denigration of working families in this country. It is that they don't work, that the first people who, when we talked about the child tax credit, they said, well, they're not going to go to work, that they're going to spend the money on drugs.
Right.
And when we got the data of what happened in that 1 year, we found that women used the money for childcare so that they could go to work, that the money was used to buy food, to pay a rent, to buy school supplies, to pay for health care, for a mortgage payment.
For child care?
Child care was one of the biggest issues because then it allowed people to go to work.
And it incentivized them to work.
That's right. It's because they want to denigrate working folks. And they just say these corporations and the folks attending and the richest 1/10 of 1% who cut coupons, that's the work. They exercise their fingers with a scissor and cut coupons, or the corporations who deal with stock buybacks. That's okay. They're not held accountable. But by God, we are going to put it to people who are trying to make ends meet, trying to deal with the cost of living and inflation today, and that child tax credit helped them do that, and we pulled the rug out from under them.
And so, Ms. DeLauro, my only proposal was I thought to have a more generous phase in. If you're going to require people to work, why not allow them to have 40% of the credit after the first $2,500 of income? That way, someone who was working and trying to meet all of the program requirements of a TANF recipient could go to work and feel some dignity, as they claim that you get, some dignity, going to work, making work pay. They go and do their 20 hours, and they're able to have time to deal with their children and help them with their homework, and they get the earned income tax credit. Playing by the rules. And all we do is just move the goalposts further and further away. Under this bill, you cannot work your way out of poverty. And we're going to make sure you stay there.
I thank the gentlelady. You just, you hit all of the efforts in this. Look, and you just said it. Children and families with $0 to $2,500 in earnings get nothing. And corporations who have avoided any kind of a tax liability get everything that they asked for. And the business community and the corporations put the red lines down, and we When we had our red lines, they got blurred and we walked backward, and we gave them everything they wanted, and we made it retroactive and say, go for it, take it, laying the groundwork for next year. And we said, we're going to skimp on this child tax credit and make sure that it doesn't reach all of those who need to be reached in order for us to turn poverty around in this country, which we proved that we could do. And with that, I'm so delighted to be able to recognize Congressman from Texas, Greg Casar, who is recognized for 4 minutes, who stood up yesterday on this floor and voted no on this tax deal last night. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your progressive nature on this stuff and for all of the issues that face working and middle-class families in this country and make this a more equitable society. I yield the gentleman 4 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Speaker, I opposed the tax bill last night, and to me it was pretty simple, because whether I'm in Austin, Texas, or San Antonio, Texas, whether I'm in a group of seniors or with young people in front of more liberal constituents or conservative ones, one of the most common questions I get asked is, why is it that I and everyday Americans pay such a higher effective tax rate than some of the biggest corporations in this country? How is it that FedEx and T-Mobile would pay none, zero, in federal income tax at all? And the answer is, look no further than the bill that we voted to pass last night, which provided tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions, in giveaways and corporate tax breaks. Importantly, as folks have noted, packaged into the bill is a watered-down partial return of the child tax credit, which thankfully will help thousands of families. But for every dollar going to kids in the bill, $5 goes to corporations. So in short, instead of helping thousands of kids, we could have helped millions of kids. We have the money to pull kids out of poverty, to ensure that people in this country are housed and fed and educated. The money is there. In this case, the money was sitting right there in this bill, just in the wrong people's pockets. We have to be willing to move the money from corporate pockets over to kids and families. We could provide working class and middle class tax cuts. We just have to be willing to fight and negotiate harder to end the giveaways to billionaires. And Ranking Member, just like you, I'm open to compromise. But instead of a deal where corporations get $5 for every $1 that kids get, what about a compromise where kids get $5 for every dollar that corporations get? I oppose this bill because we can do so much better. It is such a missed opportunity. We have to be willing to say no to deals that are so lopsided that workers get crumbs while corporate executives get a full steak dinner. Thank you, and I yield back.
You've made said very, very good points. A missed opportunity. That's the regret in all of this. Again, when I was told that you get it for a year, it's not going to go away. Well, not only did it go away, but it came back as a much watered-down proposal. And what is equally troubling is the number of people who are out there saying that this is an expansion. It really is doublespeak to the American people. It isn't an expansion. It is moving backward. And the notion that half a loaf is better than none, something is better than nothing. We cannot afford that kind of a philosophy in going forward. That's not our job. Our job is to advocate for the American people, for those working families, those middle-class families, those vulnerable families, for children. That's what we should do here. And we have that obligation. When corporate profits have skyrocketed, $3 trillion in 2023, how do we, in good conscience, say, amen, you get millions and millions of dollars in a tax break. Your goal is to get to $600 billion. And we cannot draw that line in the sand and say no. I believe in research and development. We all do. But the inequity that is built into this tax package is stunning. And, to use the words of my colleague from Wisconsin, a capitulation of saying, amen, it's okay. And that we'll fight another day. No, we had a moment to fight. And we missed that moment. But we are not stopping. We are not stopping. I heard a lot of people last night say, well, we'll get to next year and we'll get that child tax credit to where it was. And you know, it was not just a mental note. I made a list of the folks who talked about getting us to where we need to be. And time flies. We are going to hold people to their words here. Or that it's not ever going to be permanent. Well, we're going to hold you to that as well. If we're going to make anything permanent, it has to be the child tax credit. It is the antidote to inflation. It allowed families to be able to achieve economic security that they had not seen in generations because their wages haven't gone up in generations. That's what's on the minds of people today, how they are going to economically survive. And we had that opportunity to give them that help. I don't put aside helping 400,000 kids, but we could have helped many millions of kids in what we call preventable poverty. If we don't understand what our values are, who we are, why we are privileged to serve in this institution, and we can look at public policy in a way that makes a difference for people. The great Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel laureate in economics, who said, inequality is not because of globalization or modernization, but it is the public policy choices that we make. And last night, this body made a public policy choice to continue the inequality and inequitable advantage that corporations have over their lives, their families' lives, their kids' lives. That's not the direction we're going in. We will continue the fight that we have started here. This now goes to the United States Senate, and let's just see how we can influence the process there. And we will continue until there is a permanent child tax credit. And what is important that comes out of this debate in the last several days is that we have raised the decibel level on a child tax credit, its success and its future as permanent for this country. And we're going to keep it on that front burner, and we're not going to let it go. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. I want to say a thank you to Congressman Scott, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and Congressman Kassar for being here this afternoon. Thank you.